Welcome to the Curiosity Solution. I'm your host, Beverly Beal. Join us as we explore the science of curiosity, share stories of people who've used curiosity to improve their lives, and maybe inspire some aha moments along the way. Welcome to the Curiosity Solution. Today we have Zoey Sanchez. We're going to have some fun because we're going to talk about death. Not exactly all of that, but here's the thing about life is there's always a beginning and there's always an end. We always celebrate the beginning, but we don't necessarily have as much comfort with the other parentheses, or if you will, or quotation mark. So Zoey and I met through a mutual friend, her mother-in-law specifically. And as I've gotten to know her, her path to where she is, or her pathway to life is about as meandering as mine has been, which I always love finding people who just get inspired about, oh, this feels really good, let's go this direction, or oh, I think that's part of my life is done, let's go someplace else. So when so Zoey has a master's degree, or excuse me, is it PhD in physical therapy?
No, it's a master's in
It's a
occupational therapy.
occupational, okay, so very educated in helping people regain their mobility and move and reintegrate into life. She is also an artist, a mom, a wife, and has recently become a death doula. And so, while her focus at this point has been primarily with people who are dealing with the death of their pets, which is such a heartbreaking experience. Many of the things that she's learned in her work is very much transitioning into helping people mourn their loved ones as they go. So welcome, Zoey. Thank you for jumping in here and having this conversation about really how curiosity uh, really works in your world. Can you share a little bit? I mean, I can see the paintings in the background. Clearly, your creativity is on full display at all the time. But tell me some more about curiosity and how what even inspired you to go into occupational therapy?
So, first and foremost, thank you for having me. I think this is such a great opportunity to talk about the things that people don't like to talk about, which is death. And anytime I get to speak on that subject and not make it into this dark, scary thing that everyone's like, oh, we don't talk about that. I'm like, yes, it's beautiful. Let's do it. But yeah, curiosity. So I started and chicken's here, by the way. This is the first time she has not barked when she hears another voice on my computer. So just letting you know that.
I do have that effect on animals. They apparently feel safe around me.
So I was actually, my undergrad degree is a bachelor's of science in biology pre-medicine. So my parents are both doctors. They were both doctors in our country, Nicaragua. Whenever they immigrated here, obviously it doesn't carry over, so they had to get, whatever jobs they could. And so I was always around, science and healthcare because of them. And so, of course, naturally, I was like, oh, I want to be a doctor too. And so I went that path, and then it just never felt right. Like, I knew it, but I was just like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do because this is what my parents want me to do. But I was always like, I always thought of myself like a little nomad, where I just was like, I just don't like the idea of settling in one thing and it being my thing like for the rest of my life. Like, that just feels weird. And then as I was going through that path, I became a scribe in the ICU and in the ER, and I became friends with physicians. And I saw their lifestyle. They didn't have anything else. They had families, but they didn't get to see their families. Um, and I was just like, you know what? This isn't for me. I'm going to explore other things. And through that, I had friends who were in the therapy world, but I had never thought, oh, let me see about that. And so my grandpa became sick with Alzheimer's when, let me see what year of college that was. I think I was a sophomore in college. And my parents took care of him. And then eventually we had to move him into a nursing home, which was actually by our house, which was great because I got to spend every morning, every afternoon with him and dinner. And then when I got there, it just made me really sad because I saw so many people in the aging community alone.
Mhm.
And I just thought, oh my gosh, I had never really spent time in a nursing home until then. And it's funny because now thinking back on it, I would help him get dressed. I would help him get out of bed. I would help him, with dinner. And now I'm like, oh, that's what I do as my job. I'm an occupational therapist. And so I decided to take a year. I was like, I'm going to really figure out if this is what I want to do. And of course, my parents weren't too happy about it because they're like, well, like, you need to know what you want to do. And I was like, okay. And I had a friend message me one day and she said, have you ever thought about occupational therapy? I said, no, what is that? And immediately, as everyone thinks occupational therapy, it's, oh, you help me find a job. And that's what I thought, right? Like, because of course, I'm going into this career
Yeah.
that is so obscure. No one really knows what I do. And so then she started sending me links and, explaining what she does. She works with the pediatric community. So, um, and she's like, I think your love for the aging population would be really good as an occupational therapist. I said, okay. And so I switched. I mean, I literally was on this path and I was going like this. And so I became curious. I took a class. I remember I was still scribing for doctors in the ICU. And even them, they were like, are you sure you don't want to become an MD? I think you'd be really good. I'm like, no, it just doesn't feel like right. And so I followed that instinct within me. And I was like, no, I think I'm going to do this occupational therapy thing. Um, and here I
There
am.
you are. So tell me some more when because you talked a lot about the instinct and how it felt in your body. Um, Tell me some more. How is it showing? How it just didn't feel right. But can you describe to the people who are listening or watching what does that show up like you? Because like for me, when I'm feeling something that it feels like it's a right thing, I literally feel a pull forward, like my whole body is going, yes. Sometimes I'll get like a little tingle in my hands or my arms, and sometimes even my legs will feel heavy and leaden when it's not the right thing.
Yes.
Um,
So um, as you were talking, I was thinking, well, thinking back, it's not, I don't remember feeling a pull towards something, but I do remember feeling what wasn't right. And it was just like it was heavy. It was like this burden. Like it literally felt like something was weighing like on my chest, on my back.
mm,
Anytime that I thought about, oh, I gotta apply for medical school or I gotta apply for PA school or whatever. And every time that I would go into like the ER and ICU, like I loved it. It was awesome. Like I thought it was really cool. I was like, this is so awesome. But deep down, it was always like the sense of dread almost because it was like, and it was like a little voice saying, are you sure this is what you want to do? Like, is this the life? So like that hesitancy and just my body didn't even feel like my own when I was in it, if that makes sense. Like it just felt like a puppet almost.
yeah. So here's another question about that is having spent time now, with with a loved one in hospitals, not necessarily well, even in ICU, going to visit another friend whose husband had been in the ICU. I'm curious if you're picking up more on the energy that was left over in those rooms, because let's face it, ERs are traumatic. It's
Yeah.
trauma care. That's
Yeah.
right there in the title.
Right.
ICU is, it's usually for people who are going through very traumatic emotional things. Was it the medicine part, or was it that there was so much leftover energy in those spaces that was turning you away?
I actually don't think it was the energy. I think it was more, I would tune into the energy of the providers, so of the physicians that I was working with. Um, and then I would tune into the energy of the powers that be, because we all know that healthcare is run by some guy in a business suit that has no idea what medicine is, or they pretend to. Um, and so when I would see the interactions between the physicians and like what these people would want from them, I would feel that clash,
Mm.
because I felt that a physician would want what was best, but was being like told, no, you have to do this. And it's like, and so it was more of that. Um, it was more of, I guess, the politics of it. And don't get me wrong, like that still exists in occupational therapy. But it was like, I remember just they would have these surveys, and it was like, oh, well, you have to have the patient do the survey. And like it was like a customer service thing. And I was thinking to myself, like, these people are coming in dying. Like, do you think they actually give a crap about like, oh, please rate your interaction? Like, fuck no. And
Oh.
so
Hey guys, this is a real thing. There is no editing, there's no bleeping. It
sorry.
is it is what it is.
Um, so I just thought like that's crazy to me. Like we shouldn't be acting and that was another thing. Like I felt like they had to act a certain way so they could get these scores up for the hospital and stuff. And I just thought, what are we doing here, guys? Like we're supposed to be genuinely helping people. We shouldn't be following this, little survey and making sure we're getting these, oh, my other cat. We got a third cat.
Of course.
um, of course. Anyway, so it was more, excuse me, Halo. Oh no.
Halo just wants to share. Well, so it sounds to me like again, you were listening to your body. You were doing what I would call future pacing.
Mhm.
What life would be like in that role longer term,
Right,
and realized it was not feeling good in your body. So, um, you know, the other thing that I would so once you decided on being an occupational therapist and you just explained to your parents what exactly you're doing, what was their how did they react?
well, so I will say my mom has always been kind of the more softer, the kinder parent. So she said, whatever makes you happy, whatever can make you money, not to be rich or anything, but to be comfortable, um, and you're happy doing it, like that's what you should pursue. My dad, on the other hand, to this day, still doesn't understand occupational therapy, even though I've been working. And so I think he got stuck in maybe like my potential. Um,
So
yeah,
let's talk a little bit about potential.
right, yeah,
You know, I have been guilty of talking to my children about their potential and how they're wasting their potential.
right,
The reality is when whatever I see, what I was looking at for potential was my version of that child.
right,
And and since I have done some more work on myself, and I know in retrospective, and even looking at my own beratement of myself for my potential, um there's a lot of healing work that has to happen around that, because how I whatever circumstances are, there's so many potentials. I mean, come on. I could have had the potential of not marrying the man I married. I could have had the potential of not being able to have kids at all. I mean,
Right.
there's so many potential futures out there.
Mhm.
It is really about finding that alignment, finding the flow for this lifetime. That is, how am I going to fulfill my soul's goal
Yes. Yeah.
in this reality? Perhaps you were an eminent physician in a past life. That's why you still are so passionate about helping other people. But let's get back to, you're talking about occupational therapy and the elderly population, which is one of the reasons I really have been wanting to talk to you for a long time. Um, so, recently, like in the past 5 weeks, my mother-in-law that I grew to love as dearly as my own mother, passed away after a not terribly long time, about 16 months of fairly intensive medical intervention for multiple myeloma and a congestive heart failure. She Through that experience, I've come across quite a number of different therapists, physical therapists, occupational therapists, etc., who were all there to help her quality of life improve as long as she was around. um, are you still primarily working with the elderly population, and is that what inspired this move into becoming a death doula?
So yes, I still work as an inpatient rehab occupational therapist, and the majority of our population is probably 60 and older. We do get the younger population occasionally. Any if you have a history of stroke in your family, you can have a stroke, even if it's early, especially if you have any other comorbidities. But still, like the majority is older, and so I'm going to answer that in two ways. So yes, being with that population, and one thing that I noticed when I started working as an occupational therapist, especially as of late, and maybe it's because I've done the work, right? I noticed that people would open up to me and they would say, these things about their lives, and they would say, I've never told anyone that, or, I've never talked to anyone about this. And I mean, I've had people cry with me, like an emotional release. Um, and then I, because I work with the older population, the diagnosis of cancer is really popular, unfortunately.
Popular or common? It's not really popular.
Popular is not the right word.
No, I understand what you mean.
Uncommon, yes. Um, and I had this one patient specifically who I remember. And she was in her late stage of cancer, but um, whatever the people who they talked to and her family suggested inpatient rehab, but her body was done. And I remember going into my sessions with her, and she would be in pain, and she was just so exhausted, and she would say, like, I think I'm done. And so then I shifted my focus. The beauty about occupational therapy is there's so much within our scope of practice that it doesn't just have to be the rote exercises that, okay, let's do 20 bicep curls or anything like that. Like, I can hit daily routines, executive functioning, leisure, sleep, and all of that. And so I shifted my intervention to make her comfortable.
Mm.
Pain management, obviously I can't do actual pharmaceutical pain management, but there's modalities, a heat pack, positioning, aromatherapy, visualization, music. And so I started implementing that. And as because I'm PRN, so I only work whenever they need me to, but luckily during that time they needed me, you know so call it divine intervention. And as the days would progress, like, she would tell me, "Oh, you're my favorite therapy time," because I would let her body rest. I didn't have another agenda. My agenda with my patients is always, let's make you feel better at where you want to be, and I'll meet you there. And if you
Mm.
want to continue to progress, let's do it. But if you are and I could tell. And so we started doing that, and I would have conversations with her daughter. And I one day I just said it, like it came out, and go, "Has anyone talked to you about hospice?" And she's like, "Oh my gosh, no." I'm like, "That's scary. Just that sounds like a death sentence." I'm like, "It's not, like, at all." It just makes your mom comfortable. Um, and so, and then the daughter opened up to me about, her life and her life with her mom. And um, long story short, she decided to go the hospice route. And so I spoke with our physician, um, and begrudgingly, he's like, fine, like she can go to hospice. And I was like, okay, that's what they want. And so then I get a text message because, of course, I changed. They gave me, or I gave them my number, just to see how everything. I was like, hey, let me know how everything's going if you want to, of course. And then I got a text message several months later, and it was a daughter, and she said, um, "Thank you so much for suggesting hospice." Or, I didn't suggest hospice; I just educated her on it. Um, because I got to take mom home, and she passed away in her home peacefully. And we implemented a lot of what you did with her. And it was the perfect way to, a little, yeah. And so,
Right.
I was like, wow, like that makes me happy because I see so many people at the end of their lives where family members are pushing, like, no, no, you gotta keep pushing, you gotta keep. And what we don't realize is when your body is done, your body will show signs and symptoms of it wants to shut down. No matter how much you try to encourage or, get them to eat or drink or anything like that, your body is shutting down. And it's,
So, as an occupational therapist with your training, for those who are in hospice, would you still be someone who's providing some of those services still, or is that now moving from occupational therapy to the death doula piece?
yeah. So I think there are some occupational therapists who do work in hospice, but it's not as common. It's one of those emerging roles that I've seen a little bit about, but it's not too common, because everyone's focused on more of like, oh, let's get your functional life instead of like, let's do what's at the end of the life. And I think there is potential for us there because even if you are at end of life, you need to know how to do things comfortably for yourself. But that's a whole other conversation. And so for me, so that had a role. And then my own personal experience with death also had a role of me becoming a death doula, because I always felt gravitated. Like it was really weird. Every time like I would talk to my friends and stuff, they would be like, "Why do you always like to talk about dying or death or like why does that follow you?" And I'm like, "I really don't know." And it kind of freaks me out. And so one day I literally was like, "I am so sick of being scared about death because it's so scary, but yet I'm attracted to it." Like what, I was having this like conflict, like it is really prominent in my life, but I'm also really scared of it. Like I don't want to own it yet. And so I decided, well, and again, one of my friends was like, "Have you ever heard of a death doula?" And I'm like, "No." And so I looked it up and I was like, whoa. And then I looked into like INELDA, which is the association where I got trained. And then I decided, you know what, I'm going to apply for a little scholarship so I can take this course. And it changed my life.
So, say some more. What exactly? How is? I mean, I've heard of like a birth doula.
Yeah.
Um, and so what does a death doula do?
So great question. And thank
I
you
mean,
for
because you're not putting there's nobody to put the baby back inside or,
asking. Right. So the way I like to visually think about it is I am a guide holding your hand and taking you to the bridge of
Hmm.
the afterlife in whatever form you want me to be in. So I provide the emotional support. And one huge thing, the listening, actively listening to what the dying person needs to say or needs to get out, because it's hard. And this has happened with my patients. There's things they want to talk about that they don't feel comfortable talking about with their family, or they're ashamed to talk about it, or they just haven't had a space where they could just open up and spill, whatever has been burdening them and all that stuff. So I provide a space for that. So that way, when you are in that transition, you're more lighter going into it. Because
You know,
go
what you're
ahead.
saying reminds me, again, as a child, I grew up Catholic, and so that the priest was always called in to do the last rites,
Mhm.
and often it was when the person wasn't very verbal at all, but there was always an opportunity at that time for that
Right.
last final confession,
Mhm.
the obligatory deathbed confession. Not obligatory, that's the wrong word, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So it sounds as if this is a more secular version of that, the counseling prior
Yeah.
to the actual, you
Right.
know,
And I think,
flipping off the switch.
yeah. And because a lot of the fear that comes from dying, right? And I'm speaking for myself. I can't speak for anyone else, right? I can't make assumptions about how other people feel. But I have found within my looking into my own mortalities, the fear is, what are you leaving behind? What are your regrets? What unfinished business do you have? Because the time is like the clock is ticking, right? And then you're like, oh my gosh, but like maybe I need to talk about this, or maybe I haven't thought about this, or like what if, you know, oh, I need to remind my husband to do this and this and this because I don't want, no, and it's truly like we during my training, we had to pretend like we were given a diagnosis where we only had 3 months to live. And we had to talk about like what worries you, or like what are it was a series of questions, and I wrote everything down and I still have it. It's right here. Like I'm pointing to the list, because you never know. And it's a list of things like, okay, well, I need Cole to fix the electrical work in the house, the plumbing, make sure that he has this figured out. And because those would truly be my worries. Like, well, what is he going to do? He doesn't have a list of things that like I want him to finish for Luna's sake. And then and we delve deeper into like what other things have been bothering you throughout your life that maybe you want to get out. And so, when because we had to put and I really delved into this training. Like I really was in it. I was like, okay, if it's my final moments, like and the clock is ticking, like I don't want to feel that anxiety of like, oh, I didn't get to say this and oh my gosh, I didn't get to do that, right? Because then you're just anxious and you're like, ah. And I think that makes it harder. But if you go into it like preparing yourself with, this is what I want to say to this person. Let me make a list of what I want to leave behind and all of that. I think you're easing into the transition a little bit lighter.
Yeah.
And
One of the things that of all it was such a great conversation that I had with a Walgreens, employee. Um, I think she must have been working in the pharmacy, or anyway, I don't even know what her role was there. But when my mother-in-law very first entered into hospice, she suggested, recording any of the stories. Well, we'd already started recording some of her family history, um, and having her sing happy birthday
yes.
to everybody and having that recorded. And so, I felt pretty good, like I was on top of things.
Mhm.
Are there more questions that I would have loved to have asked?
Yeah.
Of course. We at least had the luxury of having a couple of months, even prior to that. We'd had plenty of time to really address some of the nuts and bolts of things. Just something as simple as knowing what her Netflix password was so that we
Right.
could cancel it.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's important.
Yeah, but I think about families who have such a, like an unexpected death, someone who's younger, God forbid, a child. Uh,
Right.
so, do you offer post death help for, like with hospice?
Mhm.
We have access to counselors I
Right.
think for a full year afterwards.
Yeah.
As a death doula, like in a birth doula, there's always that they call the fourth trimester, and then so
Right.
that helps.
Yeah.
What type of thing happens then for those who are left behind, who have not
Right.
crossed that great rainbow bridge?
Right.
Um,
So, as a death doula, because we are not, and I will always say this, we're not trained counselors, and even though I'm an occupational therapist and I utilize a lot of the things that I do within my practice as a death doula, I'm not taking that role because I'm a death doula. And so when it happens, we are there to give that space now to the person who is left behind. Whether it be a space for literally just sitting there and like that person just needs to cry because they don't feel comfortable doing it with their family because they're like, oh, I gotta be strong. I gotta, take care of all these things. We give people that space to just be with those emotions that maybe you don't want to be with by yourselves. And I'm not
mm,
here to say, okay, everything's going to be okay. No, no, I'm not about that like toxic positivity. Believe me, no. Your emotions are there to feel and you're going to write it out. To go through, you need to go through it to get past it, right? And so
right.
as a death doula, we give that space. But also back to what you were saying about recording and everything, we also do help with remembrance projects and legacy projects. And, we
Oh,
talk about that, like, oh, is there anything that, you want to do to leave your family with? And we collaborate with the living person and the person who is dying on what wants to be done. And so, you got to do that on your own, but as a death doula, had I been your death doula, I would have kind of, I don't want to say held your hand because that feels weird and not and bad, but like guided you through things, with what you wanted to do. Like you said, you were recording and birthdays, and from that, I would say like, oh, let's do this. So I would just be guided by what you would want or what the dying person would want.
so how does this then translate to pets? When you are dealing with someone who's lost their beloved pet, like I was just at a friend's place and their 18-year-old toy schnauzer passed
Mhm.
away after a series of strokes or
Yeah.
seizures or something like that. I mean, 18 is an incredibly long life for an animal.
Yes,
But
that is a blessing. I'm
yeah.
jealous because like all my pets, they didn't make it. They cat was 15, so that's pretty good. But I hear about people who are like, yeah, my cat was 20. I'm like, oh, rude. How come fun didn't last that long? Yeah. So with pets, again, what's I think difficult about pets is like the general population doesn't realize the effect and the grief that comes with losing a pet. Because for some people, losing a pet is a little bit more heartbreaking than losing a loved one, right? Because your pet is with you by your side 24/7, and you are the sole provider of your pet. And for some of us, a pet is like our soulmate, and we are so connected in that way. And so you find people who are just like almost ashamed of feeling that grief, not
Mm.
allow the grief to just come out because society is like, oh, it was just a dog. Like, why are you sad? Whatever, right? Like you can get another dog. And so holding that space. And I feel like I'm just sitting here like holding that space, but truly, because when we talk to people who have gone through a death of a pet, a death of a family member, a lot of times when you hear what people tell them, oh, well, it was their time.
The
Or,
platitudes. Ugh.
yes. And so it's like, no, I don't want to hear that. I just want to be pissed off and cry. Can someone just let me do that? Right.
Mhm.
And so that's where we come in. And then, of course, we do like visualizations and relaxation techniques because, feeling all those emotions can get you to a point where you start having anxiety and panic attacks. And so, how do we go through the emotion, but then like kind of bring ourselves back down to a grounded state? And so that's where a lot of like my visualization, meditation, relaxation, breathing techniques come into play.
So can you do this in person? Is this best done in person or can you do this remote?
So actually, I can do it remote, and in person's great, right? Because here's my little woo woo, right?
Hey, I'm
And
all about the woo, man. Remember, feng shui and all the energy work over here.
so, and I don't know anything about Reiki, and I would love to, but when I am in person with a person, I literally feel a light emanating from me and like covering both of us to make it like a calming space for them. But it can be done virtually. Like I practiced this with some of the trainees for the Death Doula program. We went through like visualization, and so it could be done through Skype, Zoom, or whatever we're using these days. I'm not technologically savvy, but whatever, FaceTime. It could be done through there.
Well, that's good. That's
But it's
good.
also really nice to just be in like with a person, feeling that warmth and energy. So
Well, we only have a few more minutes because I want to be respectful of your time because you have a little one to go pick up.
yes.
Um, Let me just run through a couple of the questions I typically ask all of my guests. Like first of all, curiosity as a child. How was that? How was that managed? How did your parents treat curiosity in you as a child?
I don't know if they managed it actually. I think I was allowed to be rampant with my curiosity. I would ask questions. The only curiosity part was the death part, funny enough, because of a tragic loss that I had within our family. And I was always too scared to ask the questions regarding that.
Mm.
And so it didn't feel like the right, like, I don't know, it just didn't feel like they would be perceptive to speaking on this thing that I was really curious about. So what I did is I got curious later on in life and did my own research. And I'll be completely transparent here for the viewers and the listeners. So let me see how much time I have left. Okay, cool. I lost my sister, my aunt, and my great grandma in a plane crash in 1989. I was 10 months old. Um, there's actually a painting. Let me see. There we go. So I did a painting here. That's them. This was early on in my art career, so but um, so I was really little, and her death was always like this weird mystery because my parents had pictures of my sister everywhere, but like no one ever sat me down and said, "This is your sister. She died in a plane crash." It was just like I
Oh,
would have to figure out. I would hear conversations as a young child, like, yeah, the accident. And it was always so obscure and scary. And I'm like, oh my God. And so like I was always curious, but I was so terrified because like, why are we not talking about this? Right. And so then it was always in the back of my mind. And, I was curious about a lot of other things, like science and how the world works and just like if you mix oil and water, what happens and stuff like that. Um, but as I grew up, I just took it into my own hands and started looking stuff up. And so I started searching about the accident, like why did it happen? How did it go down? And I had this like morbid curiosity and like I wanted to look at pictures. I wanted to look at the news reports. Um, and my curiosity one time led me to finding a book that someone did of a survivor of the plane crash. And my curiosity led me to look up this person on Facebook, and it led me to message them. And I put it all out there because I'm like, what do I have to lose? Nothing. I have nothing to lose, you know. And he got back to me, and we're friends now.
oh wow.
And like I would love to, and I get like really emotional talking about him. Like I would love to meet him. Like I think I would just give him like a big hug, and we're so connected. And we don't talk every day, but like we occasionally talk. But that's where my cure, and it was such a good feeling, and it's so weird because you're like, well, like he's a survivor, like he survived, your family didn't. But I don't know, like it's this unexplainable feeling. And I'm so happy that I got to speak with him and that we're connected. Like it's almost beautiful. And I remember I was scared to tell my mom because I didn't know how she would react to it. Um, and she was like, well, if that's what you want, you know. And as a mother now, like I understand, you know, she lost her first baby. Um, but so my curiosity has led me to making these choices that just feel good for my soul. Um,
It sounds like you were able to find the answers and to demystify
yes.
what had been shrouded in secrecy.
Mhm.
And I think that's it's part of the reason why I was so eager to do this interview today. Again, because the whole dying process is we are so uncomfortable with it when
Yeah.
in fact it is simply a moving from one
Yes.
reality to another. I mean, I think about how back in the early 1800s, when you got on that ship and you left Europe to go to America or vice versa, it in many ways was like a death because you could not really afford to go back. There was no visiting. You
Right.
might get a letter. Like with death, with sometimes people get signs or they imagine signs, but that's it. That was it.
Yeah.
So, yes, it is hard. It is so hard. We're not good at goodbyes.
Yeah.
Um, and again, you throw in the religion piece, and you throw in the
Whole other,
fear of, oh
yeah.
my gosh, did I
That's
do enough? Am I going to burn in hell?
right.
Well,
And that's like, I mean, we could literally spend like hours talking about this because there's so many facets to that. But yeah, and you know, as in my training, I remember thinking, you know, when you're about to do something that you don't know how it's going to turn out and it's really scary,
yeah,
right? And it's just that one like second of holy shit, like,
yeah,
oh yeah, I'm going to do it. That's what death is. That's what that death is. It's that one moment of what's
whew,
gonna
yeah.
happen, and it's just that transition. You're transitioning from one form to another. Um, and gosh, I wish I had more time because so with deaths of pets, after my training, because the universe likes to throw things at me, I
It was
lost
simply the graduate level training, dear.
right, right, yeah. They're like, hey, you did it. Here's your PhD now. I lost my cat, who was a black cat. This one's a tuxedo, but this painting that I have right
Sure.
here.
Uh-huh.
So I made it after her death. But when she passed, the vet came to our house. Luna was with us. She wanted to be there. I told her, whatever makes you feel comfortable. If you want to go play in your room while it happens, that's fine. But she wanted to be there. And when I say it was like, oh, it was so beautiful. I held her in my arms and I just felt her just breathe out. But it was so calming because I knew that it was just a simple transition,
Mhm.
something else. And I cry because of course I miss her, but I cry because of the beauty of it, and being able to share that with Luna, Cole, and
And how old was she at the time?
Luna was 3.
Okay.
Yeah, so she's got that graduate level of education too about dying.
I
uh,
was 4 when my favorite cat died. Unfortunately, our dog, was very jealous of the amount of attention that I was sharing with the cat and killed it right in front of me.
oh my gosh.
And so it was not until after I married my husband and realized that we should probably have a practice baby, as in, getting a puppy to see
Yeah,
if I could keep a puppy alive, that
right,
I ever had a dog again, because I hated all dogs because of that
right.
one act. I mean, it was just yeah. Anyway, but I'm looking at the time and we are out. I know you've got to go and we're about the end of our timing anyway. But Zoe, I would love to know how people can get a hold of you in case they wish to employ your services or any other kind of information or any
So
further discussions.
I am so open to anyone reaching out to me for whatever death topic you want to, even if you're just curious about what I do, if you want more info, I'm so okay with that. I also realize that I'm not exactly everyone's cup of tea. And I do want people to know that that's okay. You want to find someone that you are comfortable with and that you feel connected with. And if I'm not that person, no worries. But hopefully, I can maybe guide you to a person that is more what you're looking for.
Mhm.
And so I have a little website. It's called, gosh, what is it? TheEarthlyExit.com. TheEarthlyExit.com. And then I also have an Instagram. Is there a way that you can link it on?
Yes, I'm gonna put it all in the show notes.
Okay,
So,
perfect.
you can send that to me. I can at least, we were talking about that, but you can make sure that I'll look it up on Instagram.
Okay.
Is it also under the
Yeah,
Earthly
so
Exit?
on Instagram, I'm the Earthly Exit, and that's it.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
and then yeah, and then you can find my information to email me. And like I said, like I'm just open, and I'm open. So there's a lot on my website. I explain more of like visualization and like things that you might be interested in, like a living funeral, and I that's a whole other topic.
That's a whole other topic, but we gotta wrap this up. Zoe, thank you
Yeah,
so much for sharing so much good information, not only about being a death doula, but also occupational therapy and hospice. I mean, we touched on so many different types of comforting care
right,
along all the spectrums. So whether it's a stroke, an end of life diagnosis, or the actual end of life, you have educated us and shared your knowledge with us so much. I so appreciate it because this is something that a lot of people are very curious about, but they don't know where to start.
right.
And
Yeah.
I think you've given them a good starting point. Zoe, thank you so much. And everybody, all of the listeners, till next time.
Bye, y'all. Thanks.